Zaratiel pressed her scaled palm against the cold metal wall of the cargo hold, feeling the vibrations of the ship's engines through her bones. The cramped space reeked of industrial lubricants and stale recycled air. Her pregnancy made every breath labored, and the growing life within her shifted restlessly as if sensing her distress. The metallic taste of fear lingered on her forked tongue as she listened to the heavy footsteps approaching from the corridor beyond. The door hissed open with mechanical precision, flooding the dimly lit compartment with harsh fluorescent light. Captain Vextar stepped inside, his silver uniform immaculate despite the long journey. His reptilian features were set in a mask of cold indifference, but Zara could smell the acrid scent of his disgust rolling off him in waves. Behind him stood 2 guards in full combat armor, their plasma rifles held at ready position. "We have reached the designated coordinates," Vextar announced, his voice carrying the authority of the Galactic Empire. "Prepare yourself for disembarkation." Zara struggled to her feet, her swollen belly making the simple movement awkward and painful. At 7 months pregnant, her natural dragon form had become too large for most ship corridors, forcing her to maintain her humanoid shape constantly. The strain was exhausting, but she had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of Imperial officers only invited cruelty. "Where are we?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would bring no comfort. "Sector 7G, on the rim of civilized space," Vextar replied with a dismissive wave of his clawed hand. "A backwater system with a single inhabited planet. The locals call it Earth." The name meant nothing to Zara, but the captain's tone suggested it was somewhere the Empire considered beneath notice. She had heard whispers among the other prisoners during their journey, stories of worlds so primitive that the Empire couldn't even be bothered to conquer them properly. These forgotten corners of the galaxy became dumping grounds for those the Empire wished to forget. "The inhabitants are a young species called humans," Vextar continued, consulting a datapad with barely concealed boredom. "Pre-warp civilization, minimal technological development, no significant military capabilities. They should pose no threat to someone of your capabilities." Zara's hands instinctively moved to protect her belly. Even in her current state, she possessed strength that could tear through steel and breathe fire hot enough to melt most metals. But pregnancy had made her vulnerable in ways she had never experienced before. The constant drain of maintaining her humanoid form left her powers weakened and unpredictable. "You are being granted exile rather than execution," Vextar said, his tone suggesting this was a tremendous mercy. "The Emperor's justice is swift but not without compassion for your condition." The word condition dripped with disdain. The Empire had strict laws about genetic purity and proper breeding protocols. Zara's crime had been falling in love with someone outside her approved genetic matches, a fellow dragon who shared her dreams of freedom rather than service to the Imperial war machine. When the authorities discovered their relationship and her subsequent pregnancy, both their fates had been sealed. Her mate had been executed immediately. She had been spared only because Imperial law forbade killing pregnant females, no matter their crimes. "You will be provided with basic survival supplies and emergency shelter," one of the guards announced, reading from a prepared script. "No communication devices, no weapons, no means of contacting Imperial space. Your exile is permanent and absolute." Zara nodded wordlessly. She had known this was coming ever since the tribunal pronounced her sentence 3 months ago. The Empire's idea of mercy was abandoning her on a primitive world to live or die based on her own resourcefulness. They expected her to either perish from the harsh conditions or spend her remaining years in lonely isolation, forgotten by the civilized galaxy. The ship shuddered slightly as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small porthole, Zara caught her first glimpse of Earth, a blue and green marble swirled with white clouds, beautiful in its unspoiled simplicity. So different from the metallic cities and artificial environments of Imperial worlds. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps exile to such a place was not the curse the Empire intended it to be. The landing was rough, the cargo ship touching down in what appeared to be an empty field surrounded by rolling hills and scattered trees. The guards efficiently unloaded a small pile of survival gear, a basic shelter unit, water purification tablets, emergency rations for 2 weeks, and a few simple tools. Everything was clearly marked as temporary provisions, meant to last just long enough for her to figure out how to survive on her own. "Your exile begins now," Captain Vextar declared as the guards finished their work. The Empire will not return for you. You are no longer a citizen of civilized space. Zara said nothing as the ship's boarding ramp raised and sealed shut. The engines roared to life, kicking up dust and debris as the vessel lifted off and disappeared into the afternoon sky. Within moments, the only sound was the gentle rustling of alien grass and an unfamiliar wind. She was alone. The first few days were the hardest. Zara struggled to adapt to Earth's slightly heavier gravity and different atmospheric composition. The emergency shelter was barely large enough for her humanoid form, and she dared not risk changing to her natural dragon shape for fear of attracting unwanted attention. The local wildlife seemed harmless enough, small mammals, colorful birds, and insects unlike anything in Imperial databases, but she remained cautious. Water was plentiful from a nearby stream, and the purification tablets worked as advertised. Food was more challenging. The emergency rations were designed for short-term survival, not sustaining a pregnant dragon for months. She would need to find alternative sources of nutrition quickly. On the fourth day, she encountered her first human. Zara was attempting to fish in the stream when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. She dove behind a cluster of bushes just as a battered pickup truck came bouncing down a dirt road she hadn't noticed before. The truck stopped near the water's edge, and a figure climbed out. The human was older, perhaps in his 60s by Imperial aging standards, with weathered skin and gray hair visible beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He wore simple clothing, sturdy pants, a long-sleeved shirt, and boots caked with dried mud. His movements were slow and deliberate as he knelt by the stream and began filling several large containers with water. Zara studied him carefully. Imperial intelligence files described humans as aggressive, territorial, and prone to violence when confronted with the unknown. But this individual seemed peaceful enough, focused entirely on his task. She noticed his hands were calloused from manual labor, and there was something about his weathered face that suggested kindness rather than hostility. When he finished filling the containers, the human paused and looked directly at the bushes where Zara was hiding. "I know you're there," he said calmly, his voice carrying a strange accent she had never heard before. "Been watching you for a couple days now. You're welcome to the water, stream's big enough for both of us." Zara froze, her heart racing. Had she been spotted? Her camouflage skills were usually flawless, but pregnancy had made her clumsy and inattentive. She remained perfectly still, hoping he was talking to some local animal. The human chuckled softly. "Look, miss, I don't know what you're running from, but you're clearly in trouble. Pregnant woman living rough in the woods, no proper shelter, trying to catch fish with her bare hands? That's not a recipe for a good outcome." He knew. Somehow this primitive human had not only detected her presence but deduced her condition. Zara's mind raced through possible explanations. Perhaps this species was more perceptive than Imperial intelligence suggested. "My name's Thomas," the human continued, loading the water containers into his truck. "Thomas Mackenzie. I own a farm about 5 miles up that road. Got plenty of space, good food, warm beds. If you need help, the offer stands." Zara remained hidden as Thomas climbed back into his vehicle and drove away. But his words echoed in her mind long after the sound of his engine had faded. Kindness to strangers was not unknown in the galaxy, but it was rare enough to be remarkable. Most species looked after their own first and viewed outsiders with suspicion or hostility. That night, as she huddled in her inadequate shelter listening to her stomach growl, Zara found herself thinking about the human's offer. Common sense warned against trusting any alien species, especially one she had never encountered before. But her options were growing more limited each day. The emergency rations were nearly gone, her attempts at foraging had yielded little edible food, and the approach of what appeared to be a cold season made outdoor survival increasingly difficult. More importantly, she could feel her pregnancy progressing. The child within her was growing stronger and more active, placing additional demands on her already strained body. Soon she would need medical care, proper nutrition, and a safe place to give birth. None of these things were available in the wilderness. The next morning brought a cold rain that turned the ground to mud and made her shelter leak in a dozen places. Zara sat shivering in her soggy clothes, watching the water drip steadily through the fabric walls, and made her decision. she would seek out this Thomas Mackenzie and accept his offer of help. If he proved hostile, she was still strong enough to defend herself. If not, perhaps she had found the one thing she had never dared hope for: sanctuary for herself and her unborn child. The walk to the farm took most of the morning. Zara followed the dirt road Thomas had used, moving carefully to avoid being seen by any other humans who might prove less friendly. The landscape gradually changed from wild forest to cultivated fields, with neat rows of crops she didn't recognize stretching toward distant hills. The farm itself was larger than she had expected. A collection of buildings surrounded a modest two-story house, including what appeared to be barns, storage sheds, and workshops. Fenced pastures contained various four-legged creatures she assumed were domestic animals. The whole operation spoke of prosperity and careful management. Zara hesitated at the end of the driveway, suddenly uncertain. What if Thomas had changed his mind? What if he had told other humans about her? What if this was some kind of trap? Before she could retreat, the front door of the house opened and Thomas emerged. He was carrying 2 steaming mugs and walked toward her with the same unhurried pace she had observed at the stream. "Figured you might show up today," he said, offering her one of the mugs. Weather like this changes a person's perspective on sleeping rough. The liquid inside was dark and aromatic, unlike anything in her experience. Zara accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around its warmth. "Coffee," Thomas explained, seeing her puzzled expression. "Might be an acquired taste for you, but it'll warm you up." They stood in the drizzling rain for a moment, 2 strangers from different worlds sharing a simple drink. Finally, Thomas gestured toward the house. "Come on inside," he said. "Let's get you dried off and fed properly. We can figure out the rest from there." Zara followed him up the steps and through the front door, crossing the threshold into a warm, welcoming space that felt like safety for the first time in months. The interior was simple but comfortable, filled with handmade furniture and the scent of cooking food. Through the windows, she could see the peaceful farm stretching away under the gray sky. "Welcome to Mackenzie Farm," Thomas said, hanging up his hat and gesturing for her to sit by the fireplace. "You're safe here, miss. Whatever trouble you're running from, it can't reach you on my land." As Zara settled into a soft chair near the crackling fire, feeling genuine warmth for the first time since her exile began, she wondered if this kind human had any idea what he was offering shelter to. Soon enough, he would learn the truth about her nature and her origins. But, for now, she was simply a pregnant woman in need of help, and Thomas Mackenzie was the kind of man who offered that help without question. Perhaps the Empire had been wrong about humans after all. The first meal Thomas prepared for her was a revelation. After weeks of emergency rations and failed foraging attempts, the simple combination of roasted meat, fresh vegetables, and warm bread seemed like the finest imperial cuisine. Zara ate slowly, trying not to appear desperate despite her ravenous hunger. Thomas watched her with the eye of someone accustomed to caring for creatures in distress. He didn't ask questions about her appearance, her slightly elongated features, the faint scaling around her eyes and hands, or the way her body temperature seemed higher than human normal. If he noticed these oddities, he gave no sign. "Been farming this land for 37 years, he said conversationally as they ate. "Inherited it from my father, and he got it from his father before him. 3 generations of Mackenzies working the same soil, raising the same crops, tending the same animals." Zara listened carefully, trying to understand the significance of such continuity. Imperial doctrine emphasized mobility and adaptation. Citizens were expected to go wherever the empire needed them, leaving behind personal attachments for the greater good. The idea of multiple generations staying in one place seemed almost primitive, yet there was something appealing about such deep roots. "What do you grow here?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Corn, soybeans, wheat," Thomas replied, warming to the subject. "Some vegetables for the local market. Got cattle, pigs, chickens, and a few dairy cows. Nothing fancy, but it makes for a good living." The names of the crops meant nothing to Zara, but she could see the pride in Thomas's voice when he spoke about his work. This was clearly more than just a profession to him, it was a way of life, a connection to the land and to his family's history. After dinner, Thomas showed her to a guest bedroom on the second floor. The room was simple but clean, with a comfortable bed, warm blankets, and a window overlooking the farm's main pasture. It was the first real bed she had seen since leaving Imperial space. "Bathrooms down the hall," Thomas said, pointing out the relevant doors. "Towels are in the closet there. If you need anything during the night, just holler. I'm usually up before dawn anyway." Zara thanked him and watched as he headed downstairs. She could hear him moving around the house, checking locks and turning off lights, going through what she assumed were nightly routines developed over decades of solitary living. When she was alone, Zara finally allowed herself to relax her constant vigilance. For the first time since her exile began, she felt truly safe. The bed was soft beneath her tired body, and the blankets provided warmth without weight. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky, different constellations than those visible from Imperial worlds, but beautiful in their unfamiliarity. Her unborn child seemed to share her sense of peace, moving gently within her rather than the restless kicking that had characterized the past weeks. Perhaps the baby could sense that they had finally found shelter. As sleep began to claim her, Zara found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. Exiled from everything she had ever known, abandoned on a primitive world with nothing but basic survival gear, she had somehow found her way to this quiet farm and this kind human who asked no questions and expected nothing in return for his hospitality. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She would need to decide how much to tell Thomas about her true nature, her origins, and the reasons for her exile. But tonight, for the first time in months, she could simply rest without fear. The morning brought sunshine and the sound of roosters crowing somewhere in the distance. Zara woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then, memory returned, along with the welcome realization that she was no longer alone in the wilderness. The smell of cooking breakfast drifted up from the kitchen below, making her stomach growl with renewed hunger. She made her way downstairs to find Thomas already dressed and busy at the stove, preparing what appeared to be eggs, some kind of fried meat, and sliced bread. "Morning," he said cheerfully, glancing up from his cooking. "Hope you slept well. Figured you could use a good meal before we talk about what comes next." Zara appreciated his direct approach. Thomas clearly understood that her presence on his farm created questions that would need answers eventually. But he was giving her time to eat and gather her thoughts before addressing the complexities of her situation. Over breakfast, she found herself studying this remarkable human more closely. His movements were efficient and purposeful, suggesting a lifetime of practical work. His hands were strong but gentle, equally suited to heavy labor or delicate tasks. Most importantly, there was a quality of patient kindness about him that she had rarely encountered in her travels through Imperial space. "I should tell you," Zara began carefully, "I'm not entirely human." Thomas paused in cutting his eggs, looking at her with mild interest rather than alarm. "Figured that might be the case," he said calmly. "You've got an unusual look about you, and some of your mannerisms are different. Plus, there was the matter of how you appeared in the middle of nowhere with no explanation." His matter-of-fact acceptance surprised her. She had expected fear, suspicion, or at least curiosity about her origins. Instead, Thomas seemed to treat her revelation as simply another fact to be acknowledged and dealt with practically. "Does it matter to you?" she asked. "What I mean." Thomas considered this question seriously while finishing his breakfast. "Well," he said finally, "I've been farming long enough to know that most creatures are pretty much the same underneath. They need food, shelter, safety, and a chance to raise their young without interference. You seem to want the same basic things as anybody else." Zara felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. She had spent so much time among Imperial citizens who categorized and judged every being based on species, genetic markers, and social status. The idea that someone could look at her and see simply another creature in need of help was almost incomprehensible. "I was exiled," she continued, feeling the need to provide at least a basic explanation. "From far away. My people didn't approve of my choices, and they sent me here to live or die on my own." "That's rough," Thomas said with genuine sympathy. "Family disputes can be ugly, especially when there's politics involved. What kind of choices got you in trouble?" Zara touched her belly gently. "I fell in love with someone they didn't approve of. When I became pregnant, they decided I was a threat to their way of life. Thomas nodded as if this made perfect sense. Young people falling for the wrong person and getting cast out for it, that's an old story. Happens in human families too, though maybe not quite as dramatically. The casual way he equated her experience with human situations helped Zara feel less isolated. Perhaps the fundamental challenges of life were similar across species, regardless of technological development or social complexity. The question is, Thomas continued, leaning back in his chair, what do you want to do now? You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, but I figure you've got some decisions to make about your future. Zara had been dreading this conversation, but Thomas's gentle approach made it easier than expected. I don't have anywhere else to go, she admitted. My people made it clear that my exile is permanent. I can't return home even if I wanted to. Then, it sounds like you need to build a new home, Thomas said simply. Good thing you've got time to figure out what that looks like. They spent the rest of the morning walking around the farm while Thomas showed her the various operations he managed. The scale of it was impressive, hundreds of acres of crops, dozens of animals, and an array of buildings and equipment that represented decades of accumulated investment. Been thinking about slowing down some, Thomas admitted as they watched cattle grazing in a distant pasture. I'm not getting any younger, and this place is really too much for one person to handle properly. Zara sensed there was more to this comment than casual observation. Do you have family who could help? Had a son, Thomas replied quietly. Lost him in a car accident 5 years ago. He was going to take over the farm eventually, maybe expand it some. Now it's just me, and I'm starting to feel my age. The sadness in his voice was unmistakable. Zara realized that Thomas Mackenzie was probably as alone in his way as she was in hers. They were both dealing with the loss of planned futures and the need to find new purposes. What will you do with the farm? She asked. Haven't decided yet, Thomas said. Might sell it to one of the bigger agricultural companies, though I hate the thought of it being broken up or turned into some kind of industrial operation. This place has been in my family too long for that. As they walked back toward the house, Zara found herself studying the land with new eyes. The rolling fields, the well-maintained buildings, the peaceful atmosphere, all of it spoke to something deep in her dragon nature. Dragons were territorial creatures who valued secure nesting sites and reliable resources. This farm offered both in abundance. An idea began to form in her mind, so unexpected and ambitious that she almost dismissed it immediately. But, as the day progressed and she continued to observe Thomas's operation, the idea grew stronger and more appealing. What if she didn't just stay here temporarily? What if she made this place her permanent home and helped Thomas with the work? She was strong enough to handle heavy labor, even while pregnant, and her natural abilities could be useful in ways Thomas couldn't imagine. More importantly, she could offer him the family continuity he had lost while finding the security she needed for herself and her child. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Zara decided to voice her proposal. Thomas, she began carefully, what would you say if I offered to help you run this farm permanently? He looked at her with surprise and interest. That's an interesting idea, he said. But, you're going to have a baby soon. That's going to keep you pretty busy for a while. I know, Zara replied. But, after that, I'll need to provide for my child somehow. I have certain capabilities that might be useful around here. And, you said yourself that the place is too much for one person. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, considering her offer. What kind of capabilities are we talking about? Zara took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either secure her future or end her welcome on the farm. I'm what my people call a dragon, she said simply. I'm much stronger than I look, I can breathe fire, and I have other abilities that might prove useful. She waited for his reaction, prepared for disbelief, fear, or rejection. Instead, Thomas chuckled softly. A dragon, he repeated thoughtfully. Well, that would certainly explain a few things. Can you control these abilities? I mean, are you dangerous to be around? Not to anyone I consider a friend, Zara assured him. My people are warriors by nature, but we're also capable of great loyalty and protectiveness toward those we care about. Thomas nodded slowly. And you think this place could be home for you and your child? I think, Zara said, choosing her words carefully, that we could help each other. You need someone to help maintain the farm and carry on its traditions. I need a safe place to raise my child and build a new life. It could be a mutually beneficial arrangement. The old farmer stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over his land in the gathering darkness. Zara could see him weighing the implications of her offer, considering both the potential benefits and the risks of harboring an alien creature on his property. Finally, he turned back to her with a smile. You know what? I think that might just work out for both of us. The first month of their arrangement taught both Thomas and Zara that living and working together would require more adjustments than either had anticipated. Zara discovered that her draconic instincts often conflicted with human farming practices, while Thomas learned that accommodating a pregnant dragon required creativity and patience he hadn't known he possessed. The physical differences became apparent almost immediately. Zara's natural strength, even in her humanoid form, exceeded human capabilities by a significant margin. On her second day helping with farm work, she accidentally crushed 3 fence posts while attempting to repair a damaged section of pasture fencing. Thomas watched in amazement as the thick wooden posts splintered like matchsticks in her grip. Maybe we need to adjust your assignments, he suggested diplomatically, examining the destroyed posts. Your strength could be useful, but we'll need to figure out how to channel it properly. Zara felt embarrassed by her lack of control. Among her own people, precise manipulation of physical force was considered a basic skill. But pregnancy had made her abilities unpredictable, and the stress of adapting to an alien environment wasn't helping. I'm sorry, she said, surveying the damage. I'm not usually this clumsy with my abilities. Nothing to apologize for, Thomas replied, already thinking through solutions. We just need to find the right jobs for your particular skills. Maybe something that benefits from extra strength rather than precise control. They experimented over the following weeks, discovering that Zara excelled at tasks requiring raw power. She could move bales of hay that would normally require machinery, dig post holes in minutes rather than hours, and carry loads that would strain Thomas's back. More surprisingly, her enhanced senses proved invaluable for detecting problems that human perception might miss. There's something wrong with the cattle in the north pasture, she announced one morning after completing her patrol of the farm's perimeter. Thomas looked up from his breakfast, fork halfway to his mouth. Wrong how? I can smell sickness, Zara explained, wrinkling her nose. And their behavior patterns are different. They're clustering together more than usual, and several of them seem lethargic. Thomas had planned to check the cattle later in the week, but Zara's observation prompted him to investigate immediately. They found 3 cows showing early signs of respiratory infection, a condition that could have spread through the entire herd if left undetected. The veterinarian confirmed Zara's diagnosis and praised Thomas for catching the problem so early. Don't know how you spotted that, Dr. Sarachin said as she finished examining the affected animals. These symptoms are barely noticeable at this stage. Thomas glanced at Zara, who had remained tactfully in the background during the vet's visit. Just paying closer attention lately, he said truthfully. As word spread through the local farming community about Thomas's unusually accurate livestock health monitoring, Zara began to understand her value as a partner. Her abilities weren't just useful for heavy labor, they provided capabilities that could improve every aspect of the farm's operation. The arrangement also brought unexpected personal benefits for both of them. Thomas had been living alone for 5 years since his son's death, and Zara's presence filled a void he hadn't fully acknowledged. Not just the practical help with farm work, but the simple companionship of sharing meals, discussing daily challenges, and having someone to talk with in the evenings. For Zara, the farm represented security and acceptance she had never known, even before her exile. Imperial society was highly stratified and competitive, with individuals constantly judged against rigid standards of genetic perfection and social utility. Thomas's unconditional acceptance of her differences felt revolutionary. You don't seem bothered by what I am, she observed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas considered this comment while rocking gently in his chair. Well, you work hard, you're honest, and you're good company, he said finally. Everything else is just details. The simplicity of his perspective amazed Zara. In imperial space, her mixed heritage and nonconformist beliefs had made her an outcast even before her relationship with an unapproved mate. Here on this quiet farm, her worth was measured by her contributions and character rather than her compliance with arbitrary standards. As her pregnancy progressed, new challenges emerged. Zara's dietary needs became more complex, requiring protein sources and minerals that standard human food couldn't provide. Thomas researched extensively, consulting agricultural extension services and veterinary experts to understand the nutritional requirements of large reptilian creatures. Found something interesting, he announced one morning, returning from town with several bags of specialized feed additives. Turns out some of the supplements we use for breeding livestock might work for you too. Higher protein content, extra calcium, vitamins designed for healthy egg development. Zara was touched by his methodical approach to solving her nutritional challenges. You've put a lot of thought into this. Course I have, Thomas replied, as if the answer was obvious. Got to take care of my business partner, especially one who's eating for two. The casual way he referred to her as his business partner marked an important shift in their relationship. What had begun as temporary shelter for a desperate exile was evolving into a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. Their collaboration became more sophisticated as they learned to leverage Zara's unique abilities. Thomas invested in a small excavator attachment for his tractor, but discovered that Zara could dig irrigation ditches faster and more precisely than the mechanical equipment. Her fire-breathing capability proved invaluable for controlled burns that cleared invasive weeds and prepared fields for planting. Never seen anything like it, said Jim Peterson, a neighboring farmer who had stopped by to discuss shared water rights. Your land management has improved dramatically this season. What's your secret? Thomas and Zara had prepared for such questions. Bringing in some new techniques I learned about from agricultural journals, Thomas explained. Amazing what you can accomplish with the right approach. The cover story worked because the results spoke for themselves. Crop yields increased, livestock health improved, and the farm's overall efficiency reached levels that impressed even experienced agricultural professionals. Thomas began receiving inquiries from other farmers interested in learning his methods. We might have a problem, Zara said one evening after yet another visitor had departed with promises to return for a more detailed consultation. Too much attention could be dangerous for both of us. Thomas understood her concern. Rural communities were tight-knit, and unusual success often invited scrutiny. If people began investigating too closely, they might discover Zara's true nature and create complications neither of them wanted to face. We'll need to be more careful, he agreed. Maybe tone down some of the more dramatic improvements until things settle down. Their caution proved wise when Dr. Chen returned the following week for a routine cattle inspection and noticed several anomalies that were difficult to explain through conventional farming methods. These animals are in remarkable condition, she observed, running her hands along a cow's flank. Muscle tone, coat quality, overall health. I've rarely seen livestock this well maintained. What changes have you made to their care routine? Thomas had prepared for this question, but he could see the veterinarian's professional curiosity was genuinely aroused. Zara's been helping me pay closer attention to early warning signs, he said, gesturing toward his partner. Catching problems before they become serious. Dr. Chen turned her attention to Zara for the first time, studying her with the trained eye of someone accustomed to evaluating animal health. Zara felt a moment of panic, wondering if her non-human characteristics were more obvious than she realized. Do you have experience with large animal care? Dr. Chen asked. Some, Zara replied carefully. I grew up around livestock in a different region. Different breeds, but similar principles. It was technically true, though Zara's experience had been with creatures very different from Earth cattle. Dragons in imperial space often maintained herds of various domestic animals, both for food and as part of complex agricultural ecosystems. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Well, whatever your background, you're clearly good at this work. Thomas is lucky to have found such a capable partner. After the veterinarian left, Thomas and Zara discussed the need for a more comprehensive cover story. Zara's knowledge of animal husbandry was extensive but derived from non-human traditions that might not withstand detailed questioning. They needed explanations for her abilities that would satisfy professional curiosity without inviting deeper investigation. Maybe we should say you're from a farming family in another state, Thomas suggested. Somewhere far enough away that local people wouldn't know the details, but close enough to be believable. Zara agreed, though she worried about the complications that might arise if their deception was discovered. Imperial conditioning had taught her to value honesty and direct communication, making the necessity of constant lies uncomfortable. The stress of maintaining their secret became more acute as Zara's pregnancy entered its final stages. Her transformation abilities became increasingly unreliable, occasionally slipping without warning and revealing draconic features that would be impossible to explain. More concerning, she began experiencing instinctive urges to prepare a proper nesting site for her approaching labor. I need somewhere safe and secluded for when the baby comes, she explained to Thomas one evening. Somewhere I can be myself without worrying about discovery. Thomas had been thinking about this problem for weeks. Human medical care during childbirth assumed human physiology, which clearly wouldn't apply to Zara's situation. They needed a private location where she could give birth in her natural form without outside interference. What about the old root cellar, he suggested. It's underground, completely private, and structurally sound. We could modify it to meet your needs. The root cellar was a remnant from the farm's early days, built into a hillside and originally used for storing vegetables and preserves. It had been largely unused for years, but the stone walls and earthen floor could be adapted for Zara's purposes. They spent several days preparing the space, insulating the walls, installing proper ventilation, and creating the kind of environment Zara's instincts demanded for safe birthing. Thomas researched dragon physiology as best he could, consulting veterinary texts about large reptiles and drawing parallels to his experience with farm animals. I wish I knew more about what to expect, Zara admitted as they finished their preparations. My mother died when I was young, and Imperial society doesn't encourage sharing of traditional knowledge about childbirth. Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll figure it out together, he promised. Birth is a natural process. Your body knows what to do, even if your mind is uncertain. His confidence helped calm Zara's anxiety. Throughout her pregnancy, Thomas had demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resourcefulness in addressing challenges they had never anticipated. She trusted him to help her through whatever difficulties lay ahead. The first contractions began on a quiet Tuesday morning while Zara was checking the chicken coops. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced, intense, rhythmic, and accompanied by an overwhelming urge to seek shelter in the prepared nesting site. It's time, she told Thomas, who took one look at her condition and immediately began implementing their carefully planned protocol. They made their way to the root cellar, where Zara finally allowed herself to transform into her natural dragon form for the first time since arriving on Earth. The relief was enormous. Her humanoid shape had become increasingly uncomfortable as the pregnancy progressed, and returning to her true form felt like removing clothing that had become too tight. Thomas was awed by his first sight of Zara's dragon form. She was magnificent, nearly 20 feet long from nose to tail, covered in scales that shifted between deep emerald and burnished gold depending on the light. Her wings were folded against her sides in the confined space, but he could see they were large enough to carry her considerable bulk through the air. Despite her size and obviously powerful build, there was something inherently graceful about her movements. You're beautiful, he said simply, meaning every word. Zara felt a wave of emotion at his acceptance of her true appearance. She had feared that seeing her natural form might frighten or repulse him, but Thomas's reaction was one of wonder and respect. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 12 hours. Thomas remained with her throughout, offering water, adjusting ventilation, and providing moral support during the most intense contractions. His steady presence helped Zara focus on the work of bringing new life into the world. When the egg finally emerged, both of them were amazed by its size and beauty. Nearly 3 feet long and covered in the same emerald gold scales as Zara herself, it radiated warmth and seemed to pulse with internal life. Is it supposed to be so large? Thomas asked, examining the egg with fascination. Dragon eggs are always substantial, Zara explained, exhausted but euphoric. The baby develops for several weeks inside before hatching. It's a more protected form of gestation than live birth. Thomas helped her arrange the egg in a nest of soft materials they had prepared, positioning it so that Zara could maintain physical contact while still having room to move around. The maternal bonding that occurred through shell contact was crucial for proper development. "How long until it hatches?" he asked. 6 to 8 weeks, if everything goes normally, Zara replied. "The baby will crack the shell when it's ready to emerge." As they settled in to begin the long wait, Thomas marveled at the turn his life had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely widower contemplating the end of his family's farming legacy. Now he was partner to an alien refugee and guardian to what might be the only dragon egg on Earth. The weeks that followed were a period of careful vigilance and growing anticipation. Zara spent most of her time in the root cellar, maintaining contact with her egg and monitoring its development through senses Thomas couldn't fully understand. She could feel the baby's growth, its increasing activity, and the approach of the hatching process. Thomas managed the farm's daily operations while also caring for Zara and learning everything he could about dragon development. He brought her meals, updated her on farm activities, and helped her exercise when she needed to maintain her humanoid form for brief periods. "The baby's getting stronger," Zara reported during one of Thomas's evening visits. "I can feel it moving inside the shell, testing its strength against the walls." The excitement in her voice was unmistakable. Despite all the challenges they had faced, the approaching birth represented hope and new possibilities for both of them. "Any idea whether it's male or female?" Thomas asked. "Not yet," Zara replied, gently stroking the egg's surface. "Dragons can sense gender just before hatching, but not earlier. It's one of the mysteries we preserve." Thomas appreciated the traditions surrounding dragon birth, even though he didn't fully understand them. There was something beautiful about the way Zara's people had developed rituals that honored the mystery and wonder of new life. As the hatching approached, both of them began preparing for the next phase of their lives. The baby dragon would need specialized care, protection from discovery, and eventually education about both its draconic heritage and its unusual circumstances as possibly the only one of its kind on Earth. "What will we tell people when they ask about the baby?" Thomas wondered. Zara had been thinking about this challenge for weeks. "We'll have to be very careful about when and how the child appears in public. Dragons can learn to maintain humanoid form from a young age, but it takes practice and concentration. They would need to construct an entire fictional history for the child, where it was born, who the father was, and why Zara had suddenly acquired a baby without anyone in the community noticing a pregnancy. The deception would become more complex, but it was necessary for the child's safety. "We'll figure it out," Thomas said confidently. "We've managed everything else so far." Zara smiled at his optimism. Thomas Mackenzie had proven to be the most remarkable human she could have imagined, kind, resourceful, adaptable, and absolutely unshakable in his loyalty to those he considered family. Her child would be incredibly fortunate to have such a guardian. The first crack appeared in the eggshell on a sunny morning in late spring, nearly 8 weeks after its emergence. Zara felt the change immediately, her maternal instincts alerting her to the baby's readiness to enter the world. "Thomas," she called, her voice carrying excitement and anticipation. "It's beginning." He arrived within minutes, bringing the supplies they had prepared for this moment. The hatching process could take several hours as the baby worked to break free from its protective shell. They watched in fascination as cracks spread across the egg surface, following patterns that seemed almost artistic in their complexity. Soft sounds came from inside, chirps and scratches that spoke of new life struggling toward freedom. Finally, a small section of shell broke away entirely, revealing a tiny golden snout that immediately began exploring the wider world. More pieces fell as the baby pushed outward, and, within an hour, a perfectly formed dragon hatchling emerged from the ruins of its egg. The baby was beautiful, about the size of a house cat, covered in soft golden scales that gleamed like polished metal, with bright amber eyes that seemed surprisingly alert for a newborn creature. It looked around the root cellar with obvious curiosity, taking in its surroundings before focusing on Zara with unmistakable recognition. "Hello, little one," Zara whispered, gently stroking the hatchling's head. "Welcome to the world." The baby responded with a soft chirp and immediately began nuzzling against its mother, seeking warmth and comfort. Thomas was amazed by the obvious intelligence in its gaze. This was clearly a sapient being, not just an animal. "Can I touch her?" he asked softly. "Her?" Zara looked at him with surprise. Just a feeling, Thomas explained. Something about her manner seems feminine. Zara examined her child more closely, using senses that detected gender through chemical and bioelectric cues. You're right, she said with amazement. It is a female. How did you know? Thomas shrugged, as puzzled as she was. Farmer's intuition, maybe. You develop a sense for these things after handling enough newborn animals. Zara carefully picked up her daughter and offered her to Thomas, who accepted the tiny dragon with the confidence of someone accustomed to handling newborn creatures. The baby settled into his arms without fear, studying his face with obvious curiosity. She likes you, Zara observed with satisfaction. Good thing, Thomas replied, gently stroking the hatchling's scales. Looks like we're going to be raising her together. As they sat in the quiet root cellar, admiring the newest member of their unusual family, Thomas reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been planning for a quiet retirement and the probable end of his family's farming legacy. Now he was co-parent to what might be the only dragon child on Earth, partner in one of the most successful farming operations in the county, and guardian of secrets that could reshape humanity's understanding of life in the universe. What should we name her? He asked. Zara had been considering this question for weeks. In my culture, children are named after virtues we hope they will embody. I was thinking. Serenity. For the peace she represents after so much chaos. Serenity Mackenzie, Thomas said, testing the sound. I like it. Has a nice ring to it. The baby dragon chirped softly as if approving of her chosen name, then settled down for her first nap in the wider world. As her parents watched over her sleeping form, both felt a profound sense of hope for the future they would build together on this quiet farm at the edge of human civilization. Their partnership had evolved into something neither had expected, a family bound not by blood or species, but by choice, mutual respect, and shared commitment to protecting something precious and unique. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as parents, partners, and guardians of a remarkable child who represented the best possibilities of two very different worlds. 5 years had passed since Serenity's hatching, and Mackenzie Farm had become the most prosperous agricultural operation in 3 counties. What the local farming community attributed to innovative techniques and exceptional dedication was actually the result of a unique partnership between human ingenuity and draconic capabilities that had transformed every aspect of the farm's operation. Serenity herself had grown into a remarkable child who embodied the best qualities of both her heritages. In her human form, she appeared to be a normal 5-year-old girl with unusual golden eyes and an uncanny ability to understand animals. Only Thomas and Zara knew about her true nature, a young dragon learning to navigate a world that had no knowledge of her kind's existence. The morning routine had become a carefully choreographed dance of normalcy designed to maintain their cover while accommodating Serenity's developing abilities. She would wake before dawn in her natural dragon form, now the size of a large dog, and spend an hour practicing transformation control with her mother. By the time Thomas started his daily farm work, Serenity would be ready to appear as a human child helping with age-appropriate chores. Remember, Zara coached gently as they prepared for another day, when Mrs. Peterson comes by to pick up eggs, you need to stay in human form the entire time. No matter how excited you get about the chickens. Serenity nodded seriously, her golden scales rippling as she concentrated on the transformation. The shift from dragon to human form still required conscious effort, but she was becoming more skilled at maintaining her disguise for extended periods. I know, Mama, she replied in her small human voice. I'll be very careful. Thomas watched this daily lesson with a mixture of pride and concern. Serenity's intelligence was remarkable. She was already reading at an advanced level and demonstrated problem-solving abilities that amazed both her parents. But the constant need for deception weighed on all of them, creating stress that had grown more acute as Serenity became older and more curious about the world beyond the farm. Maybe it's time we started thinking about her education, Thomas suggested over breakfast. The local school district has been asking questions about why we haven't enrolled her in kindergarten. Zara had been dreading this conversation. Educational requirements would force them to integrate Serenity more fully into human society, creating new opportunities for discovery and exposure. But they couldn't keep her isolated indefinitely without arousing suspicion. She's too advanced for normal kindergarten, Zara pointed out. Her intellectual development is accelerated compared to human children, and her knowledge base includes things no Earth child should know. This was certainly true. Serenity's understanding of agriculture rivaled that of experienced farmers. She could identify weather patterns with uncanny accuracy, and her grasp of animal behavior surpassed that of trained veterinarians. Explaining such abilities in a 5-year-old would be virtually impossible. We could homeschool her, Thomas suggested. Lots of farm families do that. Gives kids more flexibility to help with agricultural work and learn practical skills. The homeschooling option appealed to both parents, but it would require careful planning to ensure Serenity received appropriate social interaction without exposing their secrets. They would need to balance her unique educational needs with the appearance of normal child development. Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the farm. Through the kitchen window, they could see a convoy of official-looking black SUVs turning into their driveway, definitely not typical visitors for a rural farming operation. Government vehicles, Thomas observed with growing concern. That's never a good sign. Zara felt a spike of fear that she struggled to control. Had someone discovered their secret? Was this the imperial justice she thought she had escaped? She quickly scanned the area to ensure Serenity was safely out of sight and in human form. The lead vehicle stopped near the house, and several individuals in dark suits emerged. They moved with the purposeful bearing of federal agents, but their demeanor seemed more curious than hostile. The apparent leader, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes, approached the front porch with a professional smile. "Mr. Mackenzie," she called out. "I'm Agent Sarah Vaughn with the Department of Agriculture's Advanced Research Division. We'd like to speak with you about your farming methods, if you have a few minutes." Thomas exchanged a quick glance with Zara before stepping outside. The Department of Agriculture was an unexpected agency for an investigation, but their presence still represented potential trouble. "What kind of research division?" Thomas asked politely. Agent Vaughn gestured to her colleagues, who were setting up some kind of scanning equipment near the barn. "We investigate agricultural anomalies that might have applications for improving food security and agricultural sustainability. Your farm has attracted our attention due to some unusual characteristics." Zara joined Thomas on the porch, trying to appear calm despite her racing heart. "What kind of characteristics?" "Crop yields 300% above regional averages," Agent Vaughn replied, consulting a tablet. "Livestock health metrics that exceed optimal ranges for multiple species. Soil quality improvements that appear to violate conventional agricultural science. And energy efficiency patterns that suggest unknown technological applications." The specificity of their observations was alarming. Someone had been monitoring the farm far more closely than Thomas or Zara had realized. The question was whether they suspected the true source of these improvements or were simply investigating unexplained agricultural success. "We've just been working hard," Thomas said carefully. "Nothing more complicated than that." Agent Vaughn nodded diplomatically. "I'm sure that's true. But we're hoping you might be willing to share some of your innovations with other farmers. The techniques you've developed could help address food security challenges across the country." This was a complication they hadn't anticipated. Government interest in their methods would mean scrutiny they couldn't afford, but refusing to cooperate might attract even more attention. "What exactly are you looking for?" Zara asked. "Soil samples, crop analysis, documentation of your processes," Agent Vaughn explained. "We'd also like to interview you about any new technologies or methods you might have implemented." Thomas realized they needed to provide some explanation that would satisfy the investigators without revealing the truth. "We've been experimenting with some organic farming techniques," he said. "Natural fertilizers, companion planting, that sort of thing." Agent Vaughn made notes on her tablet. "Any particular sources for these techniques?" "Academic research, agricultural extension programs, private consultation?" The questions were becoming uncomfortably specific. Zara decided to take a risk with a partial truth that might deflect further inquiry. "I have a background in agricultural sciences from overseas," she said carefully. "Some traditional methods that aren't widely used in American farming." This explanation had the advantage of being technically accurate while remaining vague enough to avoid verification. Agent Vaughn seemed intrigued by the possibility of foreign agricultural innovations. "Would you be willing to document some of these traditional methods for our research?" she asked. The department is always interested in sustainable practices that could be scaled up for broader implementation. Thomas and Zara realized they were being offered an unexpected opportunity. Instead of trying to hide their farm's success, they could potentially use government interest to their advantage by selectively sharing techniques that could be explained through conventional means. "We'd be happy to cooperate," Thomas said. "Though some of our methods are still experimental, so we'd want to be careful about how they're presented." Agent Vaughn smiled warmly. "Of course. We're not looking to publicize anything prematurely. This would be for research purposes initially." Over the following weeks, the Department of Agriculture team conducted extensive studies of Mackenzie Farm's operations. Thomas and Zara carefully guided their investigations toward aspects that could be explained through advanced but conventional techniques, soil composition improvements, innovative crop rotation schedules, and livestock management practices that appeared cutting-edge but remained within the bounds of human agricultural science. The real challenge was explaining their results without revealing Zara's enhanced senses for detecting plant diseases, her ability to accelerate composting through controlled fire application, or Serenity's uncanny understanding of animal communication. They developed creative cover stories for each of these capabilities, attributing them to intensive observation, traditional knowledge, and advanced training techniques. "Your soil improvement methods are remarkable," Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the team's lead agricultural scientist, observed during one of her visits. "The mineral balance and microbial activity levels exceed anything we've seen in conventional farming." Zara had prepared for this observation. "Traditional composting methods from my homeland emphasize specific temperature control and organic matter ratios," she explained. "The techniques have been refined over many generations." It was true that traditional dragon agricultural methods involved temperature control, though through direct fire application rather than conventional composting techniques. Dr. Walsh accepted the explanation and began documenting the apparent composting innovations for potential replication. The government attention also brought unexpected benefits. The Department of Agriculture's research grant program offered funding for farms willing to participate in sustainability studies. Mackenzie Farm qualified for substantial grants that allowed them to expand their operations and implement additional improvements that would benefit both their cover story and their actual agricultural goals. More importantly, the official recognition provided legitimacy that helped deflect local curiosity about their success. Instead of mysterious innovations, they were now seen as participants in a federal research program, a perfectly acceptable explanation for their exceptional results. Serenity watched these developments with fascination, understanding far more about the situation than a normal 5-year-old should. Her accelerated development meant she could grasp the complexities of their deception and the reasons for maintaining secrecy about their true nature. "Why can't people know what we really are?" she asked her mother one evening as they practiced transformation exercises. Zara had been expecting this question and had prepared an age-appropriate answer. "Because some people are afraid of things they don't understand," she explained gently. "And, when people are afraid, they sometimes make choices that hurt innocent creatures." "But Thomas isn't afraid," Serenity pointed out logically. "No, he isn't," Zara agreed. "Thomas is a very special person who judges others by their actions rather than their appearance. But not everyone is like Thomas." Serenity considered this explanation seriously. "So we pretend to be human to keep safe?" "That's right," Zara confirmed. "And to keep Thomas safe too. People might blame him for helping us if they knew the truth." The concept of protecting their human father resonated strongly with Serenity. Her dragon heritage included powerful instincts about loyalty and defending family members, and she understood that maintaining their cover was an act of protection for all of them. As the months passed, their unusual family developed increasingly sophisticated systems for managing their public personas while nurturing Serenity's development as both a human child and a young dragon. Thomas proved remarkably adaptable to the challenges of raising a shape-shifting child, developing innovative solutions for everything from age-appropriate education to emergency transformation protocols. The homeschooling arrangement worked well for addressing Serenity's advanced intellectual needs while maintaining their cover story. Thomas's background as a farmer provided practical knowledge about agriculture, animal husbandry, and land management, while Zara contributed extensive theoretical understanding of biological systems, weather patterns, and ecological relationships that surpassed most university-level education. She's going to need social interaction with other children eventually, Thomas observed one afternoon as they watched Serenity practice her reading while helping with farm chores. Isolation isn't healthy for any child, regardless of species. Zara understood his concern but worried about the risks of increased exposure. How do we manage that safely? Carefully, Thomas replied. Maybe start with structured activities where her abilities won't be as noticeable. 4-H Club, children's agricultural programs, things that build on her natural interests. The 4-H approach proved successful. Serenity's genuine enthusiasm for animals and agriculture made her popular with other children and impressed adult supervisors. Her knowledge was exceptional but not impossible to explain given her farm background and dedicated parents. More challenging were the social dynamics among parents and their community. Zara's foreign background and unusual appearance made her the subject of considerable curiosity, while Thomas's transformation from struggling widower to prosperous farmer attracted both admiration and suspicion. People are starting to ask questions about your wife, Sheriff Deputy Mike Torres mentioned to Thomas during a routine visit to the farm. Some folks think it's mighty convenient how she showed up just when your fortunes turned around. Thomas had anticipated this type of speculation and prepared responses that acknowledged the timing while deflecting deeper inquiry. Zara's been a blessing, he said honestly. Hard work and good partnerships can turn anyone's luck around. Deputy Torres nodded but continued probing. Where'd you say she was from again? Eastern Europe originally, Thomas replied with the vagueness they had practiced. Moved around a lot before settling here. Agricultural background runs in her family. The explanation satisfied most casual curiosity, but Thomas could see that some community members remained suspicious about their rapid success and Zara's mysterious background. Small-town social dynamics could be challenging for anyone who didn't fit standard patterns, and their situation was far from standard. The potential for exposure increased when Serenity started displaying abilities that were difficult to disguise as normal human development. Her strength was becoming noticeable, she could carry feed bags that should have been too heavy for a child her size, and her reflexes were faster than human normal. More concerning, she occasionally forgot to maintain her human appearance when she became excited or focused on interesting activities. We had a close call today, Zara reported after picking Serenity up from a 4-H meeting. She got excited about a baby calf and her eyes started changing color. I had to distract the other children before anyone noticed. These incidents reminded them that Serenity's development as a dragon would make their deception increasingly difficult to maintain. They needed long-term strategies for managing her growth and capabilities without arousing suspicion. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Walsh's agricultural research had attracted attention from international development organizations interested in applying Mackenzie Farms techniques to agricultural challenges in developing countries. The resulting collaboration opportunities would require extensive travel and consultation work that could provide cover for Serenity's continuing education and development. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization wants to fund a pilot project based on your methods, Dr. Walsh announced during one of her visits. They're particularly interested in the sustainability aspects and the potential for small-scale implementation. Thomas and Zara exchanged glances, recognizing both the opportunity and the complications such exposure might bring. International attention would provide legitimacy and resources, but it would also mean increased scrutiny from more sophisticated observers. What would that involve? Thomas asked carefully. Documentation, training programs, site visits to potential implementation locations, Dr. Walsh explained. They're talking about significant funding and the possibility of establishing Mackenzie Farm as a model for sustainable agricultural development. The offer was tempting but potentially dangerous. International agricultural experts would be far more likely to notice anomalies that local farmers might miss. However, the resources and travel opportunities could provide exactly what they needed for Serenity's long-term development. We'd need to think about it, Zara said diplomatically. This kind of expansion would be a major change for our family. Dr. Walsh nodded understandingly. Of course. Take your time. The offer will remain open. That evening, Thomas and Zara discussed the implications of accepting international recognition for their agricultural methods. The risks were substantial, but the benefits could transform their situation from careful deception to legitimate success. Serenity will need opportunities to learn about the wider world eventually, Zara pointed out. This could provide educational experiences that normal farm children never get. And if we establish ourselves as international agricultural consultants, Thomas added, it explains why our child might have unusual knowledge and capabilities. They were talking about transforming their defensive cover story into an active platform that could accommodate Serenity's development while serving genuinely useful purposes. Instead of hiding their abilities, they could find ways to apply them constructively while maintaining necessary secrecy about their true nature. The decision to accept the UN collaboration marked a turning point in their family's evolution. Over the following months, Mackenzie Farm became a destination for agricultural researchers, development professionals, and farming innovators from around the world. Thomas and Zara learned to present their methods to increasingly sophisticated audiences while protecting the secrets that made their success possible. Serenity thrived in this environment. Exposure to visitors from different countries expanded her understanding of human diversity and helped her develop social skills that would serve her well as she grew older. More importantly, the international context provided cover for her exceptional knowledge and abilities. A child raised in an environment of advanced agricultural research might reasonably be expected to display unusual capabilities. She's remarkable, observed Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a soil science researcher from Japan who had spent a week studying their composting methods. Her understanding of microbial ecosystems is more sophisticated than most graduate students. Thomas smiled proudly. She's grown up around this work. Amazing what children can absorb when they're exposed to complex ideas from an early age. The explanation satisfied Dr. Tanaka, who began incorporating some of Serenity's insights into her own research. What the scientist interpreted as advanced human learning was actually the practical application of draconic environmental knowledge passed down through generations of Zara's people. As their reputation grew, Thomas and Zara found themselves in the unique position of being able to contribute genuinely valuable knowledge to human agricultural science while protecting their family's secrets and providing Serenity with the foundation she needed for her own future development. We've built something remarkable here, Thomas reflected one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint their fields in golden light. A real partnership that benefits everyone involved. Zara smiled, watching Serenity play in the yard with their farm dog, a relationship that demonstrated her natural ability to communicate with animals in ways that delighted rather than alarmed observers. It's more than I ever hoped for when I was exiled, she admitted. A home, a family, a purpose that honors both my heritage and my new life. What do you think the future holds? Thomas asked. Zara considered the question carefully. Serenity will face challenges as she grows up, she said finally. Questions about her identity, choices about how to use her abilities, decisions about whether to reveal her true nature to others. But she'll have the foundation to make those choices wisely. And us? We'll continue to evolve, Zara replied. Our partnership has already grown beyond anything either of us initially imagined. I suspect it will continue to surprise us. As if summoned by their conversation, Serenity came running up to the porch, her human form flickering slightly with excitement as she struggled to contain her natural dragon enthusiasm. Mama, Papa Thomas, she called out breathlessly, I think I figured out how to help the corn grow faster. Can we try it tomorrow? Thomas and Zara exchanged amused glances, recognizing the familiar pattern of their daughter's innovative thinking. Serenity's unique perspective consistently produced insights that advanced their agricultural methods while contributing to human scientific knowledge. Let's hear your idea, Thomas said, patting his lap to invite her to sit down. As Serenity began explaining her latest agricultural innovation, a synthesis of draconic environmental knowledge and human farming techniques that would probably revolutionize crop production if properly implemented, Thomas reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought their family to this point. 5 years ago, he had been a lonely farmer facing the end of his family's agricultural legacy. Today, he was part of an international movement to improve sustainable farming practices, co-parent to one of the most remarkable children on Earth, and partner in a relationship that represented the best possibilities for cooperation between species. The Galactic Empire had intended Zara's exile to be a punishment that would end in isolation and despair. Instead, it had become the foundation for a new kind of family that demonstrated how different species could work together to create something greater than the sum of their individual parts. Serenity's future would undoubtedly involve challenges that none of them could fully anticipate. But she would face those challenges with the knowledge that she was loved, the skills to navigate multiple worlds, and the foundation of a partnership that had proven strong enough to transform exile into opportunity and fear into hope. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Mackenzie Farm, 3 members of an unlikely family sat together on the porch, planning tomorrow's work and dreaming about possibilities that stretched far beyond the boundaries of any single world or species. They had built a legacy that honored the best qualities of both human and draconic civilization while creating something entirely new, a testament to the power of acceptance, cooperation, and the belief that family is defined not by origin but by choice and commitment. The farm around them hummed with quiet productivity, the result of alien knowledge and human dedication working in harmony to nurture the earth and everything that grew from it. And, in the house behind them, the walls were lined with pictures documenting their journey together, photos that told the story of an exiled dragon, a lonely farmer, and the remarkable child who had become the bridge between their worlds. Their story was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Serenity would grow up to face choices and challenges that would test everything they had taught her about balancing her dual nature and finding her place in a universe that was larger and more complex than most humans could imagine. But, whatever the future held, it would be built on the foundation they had created together, a foundation of love, trust, and the conviction that even the most unlikely families could flourish when built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The Galactic Empire might have forsaken a pregnant young dragon, but, in doing so, they had given humanity something precious beyond measure, the opportunity to prove that true civilization was not measured by technological advancement or military power, but by the willingness to offer sanctuary to those in need and the wisdom to recognize that strength comes from diversity, cooperation, and the courage to embrace the unknown with open hearts and minds.